Hello everyone and welcome to the third installment of the Money and Metal Network's online coin talk. Today, Dr. Richard Kelleher will be talking to us about coins and their use in medieval England. Dr. Richard Kelleher is a senior curator of medieval and modern money at the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge. His research interests include British and Crusader numismatics and the reuse of monetary objects in social, religious, or political contexts. He's also the editor of our newsletter. So if you have any questions during the talk, please type them in the chat and Rich and I will go through them together at the end. So without further ado, I will hand you over to Dr. Richard Kelleher. Over to you, Rich.
Brilliant. Thank you very much and good afternoon, everybody. Okay, so I've been introduced, so I won't bother to introduce myself, and I'll get cracking with today's presentation. So it's going to be about, really, it's going to provide an illustrated overview of coinage in medieval England from the Norman Conquest until the end of the Plantagenet dynasty in 1485. And it will cover such things as identifying medieval coins, introduce some of the basics of production and circulation, and also highlight the importance of single finds and hoards in research. And if there's time, I've got a few slides at the end that I'd like to show, which talk about reuse of medieval coinages in non-monetary contexts. So let me fill the screen. Okay. So today we'll be looking at coins of the medieval period, as you might expect. So before we get into that, it makes sense to go over some of the basics for those of you who aren't au fait with looking at this sort of material. And when we talk about medieval English coins, we're talking for the most part about coins that were 1, made under royal authority, 2, handmade rather than machine made, and 3, made of a precious metal, initially silver, and then from the mid 14th century also in gold. And some of the terms I'll be using include things such as obverse and reverse. So the obverse, this is the side of the coin which tells us under whose authority it was made. So in the example that I've got on the screen there, the left-hand image is the obverse of this coin of Edward I. The reverse, which is the other side, that often tells us the place where the coin was made. The bust is the central image of the king there, and sometimes includes his shoulders as well as the head. The inscriptions almost exclusively are in Latin and are abbreviated. So in this example, you'll see if we start at 12 o'clock with this initial cross, you'll see EDW for Edward, Rex for Rex, ANGL Anglorum, DNS Dominus, and HYB Hiberniae. So it's telling us that Edward is King of England and Lord of Ireland. Similarly, on the reverse, this coin tells us where it was made, Civitas London, so City of London. And that's a fairly standard model throughout the whole period we're going to be looking at today. There's also some information that is really important to us, certainly when we identify coins and when we're cataloguing them, and they are listed on the left of the slide there. So the ruler and authority is incredibly important. The metal throughout this period, which is always either silver or gold. The denomination, now this is an interesting one, and why it's asterisked is the fact that medieval coins don't tell us what they're worth. They don't tell, a penny wouldn't say 1 penny on it anywhere. So there are other elements to the coin that give us that information, which we infer from. The other things, type and class, so the classifications that have been established over actually at least 150 years, some of which are still used today. They allow us to put coinage types in series and help to date them. The mint, the place where a coin was made, is very important. Moneys are sometimes indicated, certainly before 1279, and the weight and diameter. Now these are 2 of the factors that help us ascertain denomination. So people who use these coins in the medieval period would have been much more familiar with what the size and the weight meant to value compared to modern populations. The diaxis is often important for understanding something about how the mint practice operated, and this is usually a value given in degrees, which tells us the difference between the obverse alignment and the reverse. And then last of all, condition. So if a coin is very worn, that might help us understand, particularly from an archaeological context, how long it's been in circulation and what it might date to. Clipping. Now clipping can be done illicitly or as part of another issue, which we'll come to a bit later on, We'd like to know if coins are damaged, because that might affect, the weight. And then last of all, secondary use, which is something I'll come back to at the very end if there is time. So the monetary system of medieval England is important to understand, because this is the material we're looking at existed in this world. And what was in place from the Norman Conquest really was a continuation of what went before. So when William I was establishing himself, the only coins produced were pennies, and these would be physically cut into halves and quarters to produce smaller denomination pieces. Now these pennies fitted into a bigger system, which we're kind of familiar with, although the decimalization did change the system. So for the medieval population, 240 pennies made a pound, 12 pennies made a shilling, and 20 shillings also made a pound. And the monies of account of the period, and these are important and interesting, were the pound, which I've just described, and the mark. And sometimes the success or failure of new denominations that came into production was contingent upon whether or not they fitted neatly into this system. So the denominational structure, as I mentioned, from William onwards, it was pennies, which would be cut into halves and quarters. But this all changed in 1279. A reform of the coinage by Edward I introduced round pennies and halfpennies for the not for the first time, but in a systematic way. And there was an experiment with groats. So this is a 4-penny coin. It wasn't successful at this period, but it would be returned to later on. The denominations, as we move through the 14th and 15th century, also developed, the introduction of gold being one of the really major events. And this came in the form of the gold noble, which was this handsome gold coin you can see there with a figure of the king standing in a ship with a giant sword and a shield, and then this elaborate cross on the reverse. Much more space for inscriptions, so they are more extensive. And these came in a serious way after 1351, and they also had their halves and quarters. Silver coins came in, the groats came in on a permanent basis after that, as did the half groat, so the 2-penny silver coin. And then later on, we'll see the introduction of the angels. One other fact that we'll see through this period as well is the reduction in the weight of the coins in general. So there were 4 main weight reductions in 1279, 1351, 1412, and 1464-5, and the weight of the penny reduced accordingly. So what this meant in practice is that existing coins in circulation would often be cut down to match the new stuff, the weight of the new stuff coming out of the mint. So that's sometimes an indicator of when a coin was actually used and lost, if it'd been clipped down to a weight of a subsequent period. So throughout the periods of coin production that we're going to be talking about, the word mint will come up quite a lot. And this is the place where coins were minted or struck. Coins from the period we're looking at today name over 100 mint places in England and Wales, which I've illustrated on that busy map there. Some existed only briefly and had a tiny output. Some examples of those: Tutbury in Staffordshire, Castlecombe, Trowbridge in Wiltshire, and they're only known from a very small period of time. But new finds are constantly updating the known combinations of mint, money, and type. And surely there are, well, I won't say surely, but hopefully there are still some mints to be discovered, particularly for the earlier part of this, the coins covered in this talk, so in the 11th and 12th century. So many mints were temporary, occasional, or open only during periods of recoinage. But at the big end of the scale were places like is illustrated on here, the London Mint at the Tower, which was located in Mint Street, which is this part of the tower here, and actually now has a museum dedicated to that subject if you're ever visiting. So, as I mentioned, centralization of mints is a really important part of the post-conquest era. And what I've put here is 3 maps of the mints that were active, first under William I. So this is what he kind of encountered. You know, there's a very heavy bias towards Wessex. That's not surprising given where the late Anglo-Saxon rulers came from. Then under Edward I, there's a quite big reduction. But you also see there's a bit more of a balance between north and south. More Mints, Berwick, for example, and Newcastle and Kingston upon Hull are added in. Now, these aren't all active permanently throughout the period, as we'll see later, but it is a shift. And then by the time we get to Richard III's reign, there are just 3 active mints. So what happens in these environments, in these buildings or institutions? And our knowledge of the daily operations of the mint is limited to a few sources. So documents, coin dies, and the coins themselves. Documentary sources can tell us how much coinage was produced or provide figures for mint charges and the cost of premises and equipment, so that is useful. The Winton Domesday, which is a 12th century administrative document which records the land holdings in the city of Winchester, reveals that money has operated at a number of individual workshops and forges dotted around the city, and it wasn't until 1180 that they were centralised together. Now, there are no contemporary images of the workings of a medieval mint, but there are some 16th century and later examples, one which I've illustrated here. So the Hollins Head example from 1577. This shows a kind of idealized scene of operations at the Tower of London. In reality, the different activities you see on there would have taken place in separate parts of the mint, but it is a useful guide for understanding coin production. So different activities. Here's an important one towards the beginning of the process: coins made from blanks of metal called flans. They're being cut to weight here with this giant pair of what look like a type of shear there. The second thing here, so annealing or blanching. This is a process to make the silver more workable. These 2 chaps here are hammering and coining the blanks. The closest figure looks like they are using some dies. And then in the background, the money are weighing. So this will be somebody who was responsible for exchanging newly minted coins for older coins, bullion, and this sort of thing. And that would be a senior official throughout the period. So from the earliest times until 17th century, hammered coins were made by striking a metal flan between 2 dies. So there are some on the slide there. These actually rarely survive. So this is a cachet that dates to the 1360s and survived at Westminster and is now spread between the collections of the Public Record Office, the British Museum, and the Royal Mint Museum. And they give us this excellent window into what was a very regulated process. So it's really important that once dies were obsolete, they actually were destroyed, because then they can't be used to manufacture counterfeit coins. But these few dies do survive, and they give us this window into the process. Now, I don't know if you can see me as this talk is going on, but I am just going to hold up some replica dies. So this is the sort of thing we're talking about here. And this is just something we use for teaching. A pile and a trussel. The bottom one's a pile, the top one's a trussel, and a flan would be put between the 2, and they'd be hammered to impress the metal flan with the designs that have been engraved onto the 2 parts of the dies. So as we move onwards, an important thing is the bullion supply, because a state's ability to produce coins depends hugely on the availability of bullion with which to strike the coins, and precious metals are, as we know, a limited resource. So coins were tended to be made of the existing stock of the circulating coinage, which was either brought in by statute or just for individuals exchanging. Imported coins could come in and be used in this way as well, and plate and other silver objects that could be melted down and used. Now, there are large increases in mint production seen throughout this period, and they're often linked actually to discoveries of new sources of precious metal or increased exploitation of existing mines through developments in technology. It's no coincidence that the significant rise in English coin production coincided with the discovery and exploitation of new silver sources, especially in Germany in the 12th century. One of the most important were the silver deposits in the Harz Mountains in Saxony. And these supplied silver for making coins in Germany, especially the Cologne Pfennig, which I illustrate here, which in turn increased the general supplies of silver in Western Europe, which has a knock-on effect for minting elsewhere. Now, occasionally, while most of the products of the mint are of a consistent standard, minting errors do creep in. Now, I've illustrated a couple of examples here. On the left, you've got coins that have been double struck, and the top of the two images there shows an example of where a coin has shifted around on its axis between hammer strikes, because not all coins are made with just one hammer blow, it might be a few, in order to impress that image. But this one has shifted, and you can see, especially on the reverse, you can see the upright of the cross at an angle, and then a later impression has gone over the top of it. More confusingly is the one below it. In this example, what's happened is the coin has actually flipped over somehow between two striking. So you've got the obverse and the reverse on both sides. And this is most obvious where you can see on what is the left-hand image with the face of Henry III, you can see the sort of ghost of the reverse that was struck on there, first of all. And the other example on the right is what we call brockage. And this is a circumstance where a coin has stuck to the die, and then a new flan has been put in, and then the dies have been hammered together again. And what you end up with is, as in this example, you have the obverse bust from the bottom die, and then you've got forced into the back of it the impression of that bust on the coin that is stuck to the die coming through from behind. So they look confusing. Sometimes you think, oh, is it uniface? Is that gone in that way? But they're not. It's just an error at the die where a coin is stuck to the die and then been used with a second coin. So don't be scared by this chart. This is really just to give a sense of how we periodize the medieval period in England and the money that was produced. And the main takeaway really is to look at the phases. The A, B, and C bit, this is the important bit, and what the structure of what's about to come is built around, because there were three quite different phases of coin production during the period. The first is A, is the Renovatio period, so it coincides with the Norman English kings, and this is where new coin designs came out fairly regularly. Phase B is an immobilized phase, where each of these three different, which I call 4, 5, and 6 here, these different periods were kind of enclosed. There was a beginning and an end to it, but new coins were just added to the existing stock. There was no impetus to have existing coins re-minted until you got to the end of that phase and a new type was brought in. And then the last phase C is just where there's continual output. And in theory, this means that a coin that was minted in 1279 under Edward I could, in theory, survive through in circulation right towards actually the early 16th. Now, I don't know of any hoard examples where that's the case, but certainly the Ryther hoard from Yorkshire has Edward I pennies in it, and that comes from about 1485. So the Renovatio and William I and II. So William actually inherited one of the best administered coinages in all of Europe and did very little to change a successful system. By comparison with the coins of his native Normandy, which you can see on the bottom right here, they were poor quality immobilized deniers of base silver, which by this stage had become illegible and irregularly shaped. This is quite a good one given the rest of the material, and ill struck. And in this period, English coins were struck at local mints, with at least one in each county. Some new mints were opened, such as at Durham in the north, Twynham, and Pevensey in Sussex. But for the most part, there was a level of continuity from the time of Harold and Edward the Confessor. And more than 100 of the 140 moneyers of Harold II are known to have produced coins for William I and II. So in spite of the conquest, many of the moneyers also continued from Harold's administration, suggesting that although the nobility were almost entirely wiped out, middle-ranking officials and specialists such as moneyers might survive. In the Anglo-Saxon period, dies were produced locally, and one of William's only innovations was to centralise the die-cutting operations under a central die cutter or Curator under the stewardship of William Fitzotto and his heirs in London. So this is a plate of all the coins known of William I and II. The first 2 columns are of William I, and the last 5 belong to William II. And there's a good argument that actually this Pax type 8 of William II, might have been struck under both monarchs. But the reason to show this slide is that just to reinforce the idea that there was this regular churn, this change every 3 to 6 years with a new design coming out. And while the overall scheme is similar, there's a bust of the king on one side and some form of cruciform arrangement on the reverse. There is some elements, some little flourishes like type 6 here with the sword, the 2 stars next to the king there. Some of these things are repeated again in William II's reign. But the point is that this is a sort of standard Norman approach to the coinage. Now, there's probably not a serious motivation for people to change the existing coins they have every time a new type comes out, but it's thought that this probably happened when you were due to pay some kind of tax or make payments to some kind of official. You would change up your existing coins into the latest type because that is what should be used for these sorts of exchanges. Under Henry II, there's a similar system. And under him, there are 15 types of coins. So it's a pretty significant number, although many of them are very rare. If you can see on the chart there, that gives you the sort of dates of minting. Some of those may have only been active types for maybe a year or so. So it's not a surprise that those are fairly low in number. One of the innovations under Henry that didn't take off was the introduction of round halfpenny. So most of Henry's halfpennies and farthings would have been cut down pennies, but there are a few, I think maybe about 16 or maybe up to 20 examples known, so it's quite small, but there was an attempt to bring in halfpennies at this point. And this is just a example of some of Henry's types. Again, fairly standard, but this one on the top right here is interesting because it does away with the border between the bust. So you have this large bust with the letters just fitting to either side of it, and this double inscription on the reverse, which Marion Archibald argued had a German influence. And then here is one of the examples that we have of the halfpenny. What's interesting about this is for this type, the reverses are actually stamped with penny dies. So it's only the obverse die that's actually been made to this smaller size. So one of the dramatic events in the Norman period was the assize of moneyers at Winchester. And as I've highlighted, I've emboldened the bit that's, I suppose, most spectacular of this, but this was a punishment of moneyers meted out by the king because there was accusations that the quality of the coins had deteriorated so badly that, as this quote says, the man that had a pound could not lay out a penny at the market. And so they were brought to Winchester and mutilated. And what the map on the right shows is actually what the consequences had for coin production, because you have this cutoff point, literally, where 1125-45, a number of mints cease to exist. Lots of moneyers are now not doing that job anymore. And we moved into the type 15, which is, as you can see on this is the most prolific known type, produced at 21 mints by 95 moneyers. So it is a significant drop off from what it went before. So that had an important impact on coin production and minting. So following on from Henry is Stephen's reign. Now, this is really interesting because it's a fascinating source of evidence for understanding the political events of the period, often dubbed the Anarchy, but it provides complementary evidence to other sources as well. Now, the coinage is bracketed at the beginning and end by a single type produced by Stephen. And in between these two types, illustrated here, known as BMC1 and BMC7, there is a plethora of different issues. From the king's own royal mints in the south and east, so BMC2 and 6, so Stephen is still producing, but in this much reduced geographical area, to coins minted by Matilda and the Angevins in the west, a group of issues from the York area, as well as variants issued by minor barons eager to take advantage of lack of control of the currency, sometimes at actually quite a localized level. Now, we're not going to focus too much on Stephen's stuff, but maybe the stuff that is very interesting and strange about this period. So this coin here, you can see the most obvious part of it is there's this big cross over the bust of the king, and these are known as the erased die types. They're known from 15 mints and have been grouped into 3 major regional styles: Lincoln and Stamford, Nottingham and East Anglia. In each case, the dies have been mutilated in some way with marks or symbols added to the standard. And explanations of these defacements range from them being the work of Matilda's supporters, while others see them as dies that were cancelled in times of trouble and subsequently called back into use. Mark Blackburn maintained that for the Nottingham and Norfolk groups, the coins were meant to circulate and be seen and were a politically motivated statement. At around the period of Stephen's capture in 1141, York was cut off from contact with London die cutters and turned to its own resources to produce dies. Some of the more attractive and varied designs of the whole of the Norman period originate in this series. This large group is attributed to York based on shared stylistic motifs. One type, attributed to Eustace Fitzjohn, bears the standing figure of a knight with a drawn sword. And both royal and baronial types are known from the region, suggesting die cutters working outside of direct political allegiance. The single finds are dominated by the flag type and its varieties, most of which have been found in Yorkshire and the northeast. They're really interesting sites. And so this is this map here, and on the subsequent and next slide, these ellipses are, broadly speaking, establishing where the sort of center of the circulation of these types are. I mean, it's not a massive data set, but it's just to give a rough indication. And what is interesting about them is that the very few of these ellipses actually overlap with each other, and shows that coin production is quite a localized production, and circulation is fairly localized, with different issuers popping up to fill gaps. So we mentioned Matilda at the very beginning. Now, her support was strongest in the southwest, where, with her half-brother Robert of Gloucester, coins in the names and those of other minor barons were struck. The limited nature of the surviving evidence for these types is highlighted by a find of a hoard at a place called Box in Wiltshire in 1993-4. Among the 104 coins was a large, previously unrecorded lion type in the names of Robert and William, successive Earls of Gloucester. The find was made close to the regional centre of Angevin power, and even introduced to us a new mint, Castle Combe. Other types, like those of Henry of Newburgh, are known from some hoards, but have yet to be recorded as single finds, reminding us of the incomplete record from which we work, particularly with regard to localised issues in areas of lower overall finds numbers like the southwest. Now, following on from Stephen, we come to Henry II, and this is the first coinage that fits into that immobilised group that I mentioned a little bit earlier. For the first 4 years of Henry's reign, Stephen's last type, the BMC 7 type, continued to be posthumously struck. But when Henry turned his attention to the coinage, the changes he implemented was hugely significant for both the administration and appearance of the coinage. First, the design of the coin became immobilised. So unlike earlier Norman coins, which changed design at regular intervals, each successive issue was basically the same design as its predecessor, a situation that Henry would have been familiar with from his youth in Anjou. Second, there was a policy gradually implemented of centralising mint activity, so that over time the number of active mints was reduced. And third, there was a major upheaval in the mint personnel responsible for the administration of the coinage. So on this slide, you can see the sort of scheme that exists. It's divided this coinage into 6 different types, different classes, and with A, B, C, D, E, and F. And the types of information that allow us to identify these are particularly the hair, the mantle or cloak, the shape of the arm. But there's no significant change like we see in the earlier types. And here's just a couple of sort of statistical images based on finds numbers. So all the maps you'll see, all the graphs, they're based on my PhD stuff, which is, I mean, it's 12 years old now, but this is a large data set of portable antiquity scheme material that I used to look at monetization in medieval England. So although if I did this now, the numbers would all be very much higher, I think the proportions would still be maintained. So this just gives you a sense of the numbers of mints and moneyers and the numbers of single finds. So you can see that type class A, of course, is the biggest one because that is the recoinage. Class C is very prolific, and then F is probably the next most. And these bars here give you an idea of the proportions of small change against pennies, which is something that we'll come on to a little bit more in the next few slides. So next up, it was the short cross. So this again is another innovation that came in under Henry II, introduced in 1180, full recoinage of the existing cross and crosslets or TLB type. And what you can see is, you know, this is a very good example of one of the examples. It's from the King's Lynn Mint, one of the later examples, class 5. But the basics are the same. You have this inscription that says Henricus Rex around the outside and the obverse, a bust in the middle with a beard, curls to either side of the head. This hand here holding a scepter which divides parts of the inscription, and then this short cross on the reverse, that's where it gets its name from, with these crosslets in the angles, and then the name of the moneyer and the mint divided by the word on. So this one says Wilhelm on Le, so William at Lynn. Now what's important with this type, or actually what important, it's different from what went before, is the fact that these were seriously immobilized in as much as the name Henricus Rex on the coin was continued from Henry II to Richard I to John, and then back to Henry III. So obviously I mentioned the fact that immobilized coinages were fairly standard in parts of France, which these kings would have been familiar with, but also it might be a sense that you don't mess with a working system, because these were high quality silver coins and had a reputation, as we'll see shortly, that went beyond the shores of the country that produced it. So this graph and table here give you again a sense of the sort of numbers of these coins. There's always a surge at the beginning in class 1 as the old stock is reminted into new. There's the class 5 peak here and class 7. Now what's a bit deceptive about these is that the classes, they're not of fixed duration, as we can see on the date ranges here. So while you might get, let's say, class 5, 472 coins, class 7, 312. Class 7 is a lot longer in duration than the 6 years of class 5. So if we even these out as losses per year of class, this column at the end in orange gives a better idea of actually what percentage of losses over time those finds represent. So again, here's just to give you a sense of what the things look like. Bottom left there, this is the kind of the worst stage of the Richard, some of the coins minted under Richard, with this bust that is, you know, barely legible. Bits of it seem to be coming out the side of the head. And then it was fixed under these type 5s of John, and a fairly neat up to the end of the period. And this is a map from the my work, which is just to give a sense of, there's a lot of this stuff being found in England and Wales, and this is the first actually time we see the use of coinage extending actually quite some distance up north and west into the southwest, where it really wasn't possible in earlier periods. So the short cross was actually very influential outside of its original context. So prior to his accession, John had struck coins as Lord of Ireland, which named him, unlike the immobilized English issues. So these ones here, you can see top left, Iohannes there. And As king, new style coins were introduced depicting on the obverse the king's bust set within a triangle, and on the reverse a star over crescent in the same. The triangle motif would mark out Irish coinages for the next century. It was not only pennies that were produced, we also see halfpence and farthings of similar design. Short cross coins were influential in Wales and Scotland. The short cross style coins minted at Rutland in North Wales are enigmatic. They don't fit easily into the English classification, although they look similar, and have recently been interpreted as issues minted under the authority of the Princes of Gwynedd. And in the bottom right there, in Scotland, coin design and style closely followed the English model, with the short cross coins here of William the Lion and also Alexander the Second. But the classic profile bust of Scotland and the stars or mullets on the reverse are clearly obvious. Now, I mentioned a little bit about the international reach or importance of short cross, and it's a measure of sort of integrity and success of a given coinage is how far it travels, and is it imitated or adopted in the places it goes to. So these were the first short cross coins, were the first to be used on the continent in any serious way. And there are many hoards of short cross coins, as you can see from the map, from like Normandy, Maine, Anjou, and Brittany. And both hoards and single finds have been found as far away as the Balkans, Greece, and the Holy Land. And this concreted lump in the top right, you can see there, is a group of silver short cross coins and Cologne pfennigs found in a shipwreck off the coast of southern Turkey. From further afield, particularly in the Rhineland, we find a range of issues showing the influence of English short cross coins on the design. So the coins of the bishops of Munster imitate the reverse type, with the traditional emblem of the bishop's coins, the bust of St. Paul, found on the obverse. The sterlings of Bernhard, a third Count of Lippe, imitate English coins, even retaining the Henricus legend on the obverse, but substituting the reverse cross for a solid cross with cinquefoil. And this period marked the start of the English model being influential outside of England. So during Henry III's reign, there's this last of the big immobilized recoinages. This one took place in 1247. It was placed in the hands of the king's brother, Richard of Cornwall, who was one of the richest men in Europe, and he was assigned half the profits of the coinage for 5 years in exchange for a loan of 10,000 marks, which was £6,666, 13 shillings, 4pence. So to put this in perspective, Henry's annual revenue in 1230 was £24,000, and his extensive rebuilding of Westminster Abbey and Palace cost almost £55,000. So what we see in terms of the design is this neat stylized bust on the left. You've still got the hand holding the scepter in the inscription, but it's really the reverse that's changed most, with the extension of the short cross to the edges of the coin. This was an attempt to, if it's not to deter, but to make obvious when coins had been clipped, if the weight wasn't necessarily something that could be seen, because crimes against the currency is a continual threat throughout when you're dealing with precious metal. Because of this sort of compression of space as well, what you see on Henry III's coins are a lot of ligated or ligatured letters. The best example on here is this one, which is an N and a D, which share this upright here. And that's a standard thing that happens on these coins. So one thing was really interesting and probably wasn't known before the advent of using metal detected single finds was the proportion of small change increasing over time in the 12th and 13th century. So these are the three coinage periods: the cross-crosslets, the short cross, long cross. And these graphs show, these pie charts, show the proportions of pennies, halfpennies, and farthings. And as you can see, there's a significant increase in the use of halfpennies and farthings over these phases, to the point that only 38% of the long cross finds are actually full pennies. And this has implications. You can't see this stuff in the hoards because the hoards are generally keeping full weight good coins hidden away somewhere. But it just shows that the sort of diversification of the use of money, and actually smaller value objects were now, or goods and services were being, or coinage was able to be used for those things. One other innovation under Henry III, and then again one that was not necessarily a success, was the attempt to bring in the gold coin. And this happened in 1257, and it's the first gold coin for about 200 years, and the first attempt to produce a coin greater value than the silver penny. So the 13th century was a time of commercial expansion dominated by Italian city-states of Florence and Genoa, who minted high-value coins from 1252. Henry III was a fervent accumulator of gold, amassing two great treasures across the middle of the 13th century. The second treasure was begun as a war chest to pay for the expulsion of the Hohenstaufen rulers of Sicily. Ultimately, this invasion never came to fruition, and the gold was used in the production of Henry's gold coin here, which you can see enlarged. And the gold coins in the treasures that he amassed, now most of it was not in coin form, but those that were came from the three areas where gold was most commonly used. So Islamic areas of the Mediterranean, the Byzantine Empire, and Italy. And of these, the most prolific were the bezants, the colloquial term used for gold hyperpyra from Byzantium, which are recorded as being used in England in the 12th and 13th century. The other group, the oboli de musk, have been identified as Almohad dinars from Islamic Spain and North Africa. And we actually have an example here, which was found in Suffolk in pretty bad condition, but this shows that these things were being used. And this is one from our collection here. And the final group are the Sicilian Augustales of Frederick II. So when this new coin was issued, it was valued at 20 silver pence. The obverse depicts the seated figure of the king in the style of the Sovereign Eagle's penny of Edward the Confessor, who was a great hero of Henry III, of course. And the reverse shows the voided long cross with rows and pellets in each angle, and a inscription around the edge names William of London. Now, William of London was the king's goldsmith, William of Gloucester. The issue was short-lived and quickly withdrawn, unfortunately, and it's been suggested that the coins were undervalued against the silver and quickly drained overseas. So the last of the long cross coins, and very rare, the last class were minted under Edward I, but Edward's contribution was this big reform of 1279, which fundamentally changed the monetary system. He reorganized monetary affairs to such an extent that it would have a profound impact and set the model for the next 250. So what is the change? Well, you've got this new bust here. It's actually much more lifelike, although it's not meant to be a direct portrait. You have the inscription around the edge, abbreviated. So Edward, King of England, Lord of Ireland. And on the reverse, the cross has become solid, and the money as name has been taken away. So it will either, as in this example, say Villa or Civitas, and then the name of the place that the coin was struck. So this is from Bury St Edmunds. Now this is, I'm aware of time, so I won't dwell too long on this particular graph, but it's just to show that London is the main mint. And Canterbury and Durham and Bury St Edmunds are the other ones. And then these other places like Bristol, Chester, Exeter, etc., they are active at periods of recoinage. So they're not happening all the time, but their ultimate role is to provide a regional centre for the exchange of old stuff for new. Edward I also introduced the round, as we saw actually a bit earlier on, introduced round halfpennies and farthings on a permanent basis. There was an attempt at the 4-penny groat, but this was not successful at this time. And something we haven't really mentioned yet are some of the hoards or sources that are of interest. Now, I'll quickly talk about the Tutbury hoard because this is spectacular. Now, I don't want you to feel that this is the standard medieval hoard of these enormous things. They're exceptional, but some of them, like this one, have an amazing story. This was found in 1831 by workmen digging gravel in the River Dove near Tutbury Castle in Staffordshire. And there are notices that survive from the time which say, by the command of His Majesty, the notice claimed the coins for the crown, forbidding further searches, but including an amnesty for those coins already recovered. And contemporary testimony provides a sense of the scale of the find, claiming 150 coins were turned up in a single shovel full of gravel. Indeed, nearly 5,000 were collected by two individuals, which they sold to bystanders at 6, 7, 8 or 8 shillings and sixpence per hundred, while according to the estimation of intelligent persons in the neighbourhood, some 200,000 coins were dispersed among collectors or silver dealers at the time of finding. Now, this is a big deal. This is a big cache of silver coins. And those that survive pinpoint the date of burial to 1322, at which time the Duchy of Lancaster was held, along with that of Derby and Leicester, by Thomas, grandson of Henry III and cousin of Edward II, with whom he was in open rebellion. So the Battle of Burton Bridge, which happened in the vicinity of Tutbury, was a disaster for Thomas, from which he fled, later captured at Pontefract and executed by beheading. So an account of an inquest in 1323 investigating incidents of looting and robbery around the time of the battle provide a startling fact that 3 barrels containing a total of £1,500, which would be around 360,000 of these pennies, had been removed from the castle and vanished without trace. And I think there can be little doubt that this significant sum of cash was the property of Thomas of Lancaster, probably gathered as a war chest for his rebellion against the king. And the finding, though nearly 200 years ago, adds to the mystique of this sort of idea of hidden treasure, because it was proclaimed that some of the finders at the time were so greatly enriched by it that although they had been poor labourers, managed with what they got to set up as small farmers. Now, I spoke briefly about the influence of the short cross coinage as it was found use on the continent. I think the popularity of the Edwardian coins was such that they were imitated in significant numbers, and lots of those coins actually came back into circulation in England. So between about 1290 and 1340, there was this unprecedented influx of coins into England and Scotland, deriving mainly from the Low Countries, where many petty rulers had right to mint coins in their own name. There was a first wave that's shown on the left-hand map here, and the top 2 images. These are known as crockards and pollards. So the crockards are the coins with the bust with the roses around the head, and then the pollards are the bare-headed ones. And in 1299, Edward's government took action to combat these unwelcome invaders. The Statute of Stepney banned the import of foreign coins and the export of silver coins, plate, and bullion. And at Christmas 1299, they were valued down to a halfpenny, and in March next year were completely prohibited. But this didn't really solve the problem, because a new type of coin, much more closely resembling the English, began to be produced. So these are what the crowned head types. And you can see from the maps that they actually did circulate in some numbers. And they do exist as a small fraction of a lot of hoards of the period. So following Edward I and II's reign and the reform there, the next big thing to happen was the introduction of gold coins on a permanent basis. So the gold noble from 1344, this is a good example of the type, came into production, almost always produced at London, and the noble was produced with a half noble and a quarter noble. The silver groat comes in on a permanent basis and starts to become one of the main coins in use. And over this period, the penny becomes less and less of a useful coin. Now, here's a hoard that we have in the collection here, the Chesterton Lane Corner hoard, which contained 9 gold coins and upwards of 1,500 silver coins, and this was secreted around the time of the Black Death, and is a good window into the circulating medium. So gold was in production, but most of the daily stuff that people used was silver. One of the issues that plagued the government in the 14th and 15th century was the lack of small change, because people need smaller coins for a lot of their sort of daily requirements, and there's a continual dialogue about how this is to be resolved. And these are just some of the examples that are recorded in records, petitions, particularly in complaints about the lack of small change, because mints didn't like making the smaller coins because the kind of input that has to go into it in terms of the physical work is about the same as it would be for producing a coin of a much larger value. So if you've got a pound of silver to turn into pennies and a pound of silver to turn into groats, it's easier and less work to turn that pound of silver into groats. But this again had a knock-on effect, which was filled by imported coins. So Italian coins are generally quite rare finds in England, apart from Venetian soldini. Now these became known in common parlance as the galley halfpennies, as their appearance coincided with the annual appearance of the Venetian trading fleets that came to places like London and Sandwich and Dover to trade for wool. These small silver coins penetrated into circulation because they were a good proxy for halfpennies. Again, the government didn't like them. They became a problem, and actions to fix this issue included forcible searches of galleys and application of political pressure to the Venetian Senate. So it did tail off, but it would come back again. But this just shows a good example of when foreign coins fill the gap. So I think I'm running out of time here, so I will be a bit more brief on the next couple. So the mid-late 15th century, we've settled down to a model here of gold and large silver. The noble itself ceases to become a coin and is replaced by, I say replaced, but its design is incorporated into the new gold rial or rose noble. So you've still got the figure of the king in the ship and this pattern on the back, but this becomes a 10 shilling coin. There is the gold angel, which comes in from 1464, and that's coming in to replace the old value of the noble, which was still something that was an important coin to have in your circulating pool. I'm going to skip past that. Just at the very end of the 15th century, we get another wave of Venetian soldini. So this different design of the later 15th century doges, and again, they're in some numbers. Other foreign coins that came in include the Burgundian double petard. Now this was actually tolerated because there were various accords between the English and the Burgundian governments for the double petards and English groats to circulate as equals. And then the last thing at the bottom there, that is a Portuguese chinfrau, which again are found in some numbers, but these are the pieces from the late part of the era we're looking at here. So Campbell, am I? Oh, should I finish there, or? Because I think we up to nearly up to an hour.
Do you feel like you're done?
I am done. Yes, I won't do the coin jewelry and folded coins thing, but maybe you can save that for another day because I've got actually probably a lot more to say about that stuff. Okay. So just to sort of sum up, this is a period of huge change in the English coinage. We began the era with multiple mints, just silver pennies that were cut down. By the end of it, by the reign of Richard III, we've got a massive reduction in the number of mints. We've got a main circulating medium that is made of groats and half groats, and gold coinage is a standard part of the story. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much for that enlightening talk, Rich, on a period I really don't know that much about myself. Before we get into the Q&A, I'm just going to post a link in the chat for everybody. This is just a survey which will provide us feedback on the talk and sort of help us shape future talks that we will offer online. Okay, so questions. We have a question from Chris. Was the obverse die always in the trussel and the reverse in the pile, or did it vary?
Right, thanks, Chris. As far as we can tell, the obverse die was in the pile. So it was the one that was the lower of the two, because you'd put your more complex it's almost like, you know, it's efficiency drive really. So if this is the die that is going to take less of a beating because this top one has the hammer on it, you put the complicated design on that because it will last longer than the less complicated design on that. And this is, you know, this is how our die studies work, because there are more of these for every one of these. So you can sequence the production of coins at that sort of micro level using this this sort of numismatic technique. Yeah, I'm not aware of any, but certainly none of the existing dies, none of the stuff from the Pix Chapel from Westminster, they're all of that standard, and so are the few Norman ones that survive as well. But maybe I don't know if there was ever a case where they mixed up, because, you know, you do get some errors in any sort of hand manufacturing. So maybe there are some, but I've not seen the coins that would indicate that.
Thank you for the answer. Joe asks, were the misstruck coins and brokerage coins still used? Why were they not melted down again?
Good question, Joe. I think although, you know, there's important aspects of coinage for them and money generally for it to be accepted by people. You know, it has to have stamps of authority, things you can trust, you know, guarantees of value, those sorts of things. The silver content was the same, whether or not they'd messed up the dies a little bit. So, you know, in a big batch of coins, that coin wasn't worth any less in terms of its intrinsic value to its partners, and it was just a case of it wasn't noticed, and these are the few that have snuck through. I think it's interesting that at least the ones I've seen, these because as you saw, they're all portable antiquities scheme, the brokerage and the two double struck ones, but they were all single finds. So unless, you know, it might be stretching it to say maybe people noticed it and chucked those ones away. I don't think that is the case, but hoards tend to filter out things that aren't quite the best version of the thing that is being hoarded at that time, unless it's, you know, gathered in some kind of emergency situation. So I think that it's just you know, one in every, I know it might be one in every 500,000, who knows, but it just means that not every coin was checked for die alignment and double striking.
Thank you. We have 2 comments saying they would like to hear more about coin reuse. Do you think you could provide a very quick comment on that?
I would do it. I'll definitely do it. I've got loads to say on it. There are 2. What I was going to look at today, and we can absolutely pop this in if you don't want to. If you're not too bored of having me droning on about medieval stuff, maybe towards the end of the year we could do another one where I focus particularly on 2 types of reuse. So what we have in a lot of the work that I've done, and again that single finds have produced great evidence for, are coins that have been folded intentionally in half. And so I've done, you know, some research writing about this subject, and the main gist of it is that it's very likely that a lot of these coins were folded as pilgrim vows over you know, you would say it to a specific saint, asking for a certain type of effect. It could be over a sick or injured person, and there was some documentary evidence for that, or other things. And if you were successful, then the implication was that you would take your folded coin to the shrine of that saint. Actually, I've got one here, I can show you it. That is a little short cross penny that's been folded in half. So that would be the star of any future talk. So the other type of transformation are coins that have been turned into jewelry, and there's this quite distinctive set of different styles. So there's very early on, there's this sort of badge style that you get in the Norman period. Then there are the coins that have their centers cut out and are turned into little annular brooches. Then there are the dress hooks, using bigger coins that come in the 14th century, and then a random selection of pendants that just go throughout. But there's quite a lot of really interesting stuff to say, because it goes beyond the money situation and talks a little about sort of medieval life and belief, and the use of objects in ritual and religious practice. So I'd love to do it if people are up for it.
Oh, brilliant. We can totally organize that, Rich. Thank you for answering the question. Sarah asks, how long were coins in circulation for? You briefly alluded to this earlier, but it would be useful to know more. And I'll just add my own little question onto that as well. So with Roman coins, I know in the imperial era, we had a lot of republican coins still in circulation. Is it a similar sort of case with medieval coinage?
The possibilities of a coin surviving long in circulation depends, I think, in what period it is produced. So it's for us, it's when is the next time that there is a big opportunity for everything that exists to be remade into something else. So in the early Norman period, there is every 3 to 6 years, their existing currency becomes the latest issue, right? And so over time, if you're going, through these different, the 13 types of the Williams, the 15 types of Henry I, and if you plot the types from hoards on a graph, you will see that there's this depreciation in the older stuff as time goes on, because everything is every single in every new type coming out, they're using old types to make that new type. So they can survive for a bit, but then there are these breaks. So 1158 is the big one, where all Norman coins and anything else that might be floating around in circulation are turned into the cross and crosslets. Then that continues in circulation to 1180, and then that's another big cut off where everything is changed. And then again 1247, that happens again, and then 1279. So there are those basically mop up everything. But then after 1279, the possibility is that a penny, as I sort of mentioned, could survive in currency for a long time until at its very latest 1544, which coincides with Henry VIII's debasement of the coinage, and then lots of good silver just goes out of circulation. So there's definitely questions there. I think the one thing I've always struggled with in terms of the finds is in dating the post 1279 stuff to its loss period as opposed to its production period, because we do have those. We do know the date, the dates at which the new stuff was reduced in weight by people clipping down, but that's a good exercise, but it'd take quite a bit of work. I've always wanted to try and explore that. So yeah, it depends when the coin was made. 1279 stuff can go a long time.
Brilliant, thank you. That seems to be all the questions. I'll just give people a few more moments if they want to ask anything else. But in the meantime, I'll just say, if you enjoyed today's talk and you'd like to watch any of our previous talks that we've done online, they're available at warwick.ac.uk/mmn. You can also subscribe to Richard's newsletter there, where you will receive correspondence from us about future training days and future online talks. Lots of people saying thank you, Rich. Lots of interest as well in your coin reuse talk, so we will have to do that. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Rich. And I think we will end the call there.
Great. Thanks a lot, everybody.